Hello again and welcome to a brand new episode of the MMA Beat. It is Thursday, June 30th, 2016. I'm Ariel Helwani inside our New York City studio. For our American fans, a happy early 4th of July to you. For our Canadian fans, most importantly, a happy early July 1st to you, Canada's Independence Day. Did you guys know that?
I did not know that.
We're
Canada
always
Day.
just a step ahead of you guys.
Is that Canada Day? Is that what
That
people
is
call
Canada's
it?
Day, yeah. Exciting,
I
right?
didn't know that you celebrate that in Montreal. There was the Quebec's.
Well,
Quebecois.
actually,
you got a
to
bunch
be
of
exact,
separatists.
Quebec's birthday was last week, and partly why I wasn't here last week on the show. You guys did a great job, including you, Danny. But
You're a
yes,
secessionist?
separatist.
Separatist.
Yes, but that is a different topic for a different day. Let's talk some mixed martial arts. Of course, you know that man. That is Luke Thomas of SiriusXM and MMAfighting.com. That is the man in the shirt, Jeff Wagenheim of the Washington Post, and that is Danny Segura of MMAfighting.com. How's my accent?
It's getting there.
Getting
all right.
better.
Yeah, getting a little better.
We've come a long way from
Yeah.
Tampa Bay, right?
Definitely.
Back-to-back appearances for Mr. Segura, this time filling in for the man in the hat. Okay, guys, this feels like, in my opinion, the calm before the storm of next week, right? UFC 200 week, all three events, International Fight Week. It's going to be pretty insane. If you look at it from a media perspective, you look at the PR schedule, I mean, it's never been this stacked. And the cards.
Let me ask you, was it this bad for 194?
This is way more.
Really? Okay.
Way more when you include the UFC 202 press conference with Nate Diaz and Conor McGregor. And I think that the cards themselves are more stagnant. You have 3 title fights in a row. There's just a lot more meat to that bone. Here's what I want to ask you. Of course, everyone's talking about John Jones and Daniel Cormier and the return of Brock Lesnar. We know the big stories. We know about the title fight on Thursday and Friday. Is there one or two, if you want, under the radar storylines going into next week that people aren't talking about just because there's not enough real estate, there's not enough time to focus on these things, that you're looking forward to seeing play out?
2 of them.
Okay.
The first one is the return of Kat Zingano. Boy, this is a fun one, right?
Yes.
And it's been, I don't know if you've tried, I mean, obviously you probably have better luck than I do. She is hard to get a hold of these days, and I think that's intentional. Her management is kind of putting walls up around her. Now, that will eventually go away. She'll have to do some media, at least once she gets to Vegas. But you've noticed she's not done a lot of interviews. She had a devastating loss to Rousey. She wanted an immediate rematch, and then she just went away. And it's going to be very interesting to see how she looks, especially since she's taking on a very tough challenger in Juliana Pena. So that's the first one, I think.
And by the way, she hasn't fought in a year and a half.
Right.
I mean, think about how much has changed since UFC 184.
It's literally a different sport,
Yes.
right? And so that's the first one. The second one is, you mentioned maybe one that people aren't talking about. They're literally not talking about this one. I mentioned this on my live chat yesterday. There's 3 shows. The second one is the finale of The Ultimate Fighter. I feel like, we've always like, is this the end of Tough? I don't know if it's the end of Tough. I can't make any more predictions about it. But I can be sure about this. The ratings have never been lower, and people do not talk about it on social media. There is no chatter about it. And as I wonder, as we get there, can anyone name any of the 4 semifinalists?
I can't.
Right.
No.
Right.
I can't
So
see
this
that.
is what my point being is, what are we going to say about the Ultimate Fighter after this? Is this the straw that breaks the camel's back? Maybe it's not. I guess the only thing I want to say is, just to conclude here after rambling, I really feel like we're getting a lot closer to the Ultimate Fighter's end than we have previously. I know I've said that for years, but this has got to be a little bit of a breaking point.
Well, okay, but the interesting thing is that the next Ultimate Fighter is already in motion.
They can't just kill it off, but
Right.
I mean, like, the writing's on the wall in terms of what value they're really going to be able to generate from this.
Have you guys watched any episode? Have you watched one episode?
Just the debut, and that's it.
That's it. How about you guys?
I didn't watch any of the episodes. I think when I was hearing about the interplay between the coaches, I scrolled through a little bit of it just to see if anything happened, but no, not really.
Yeah, not really. I just watched the first episode, and that was about it.
It's funny, people have asked me, what do you think? I've been asked this, like, oh, is Joanna coming off bad? You know, there's people here and there. And I don't know because I haven't seen a single second of the show. And maybe if she is coming off bad, it's a good thing it's happening on this show because no one's watching it. You know, I mean, might as well do it when no one's watching it.
For
if you're coming
DVR
off bad.
ratings, they're pulling 360,000 viewers. What? I mean, that is insane.
I interviewed Jessica Aguilar yesterday,
Okay.
and she was talking about the show, and she was talking about how Joanna looked on the show, and she also agreed that she wasn't really.
Really? So she
looking
is
too well.
watching?
Yes, she is watching.
It's her
but
weight
of course,
class.
it's her weight class. You know, it's an important fight.
I want to add this, though. I was in Montreal last week, and I kid you not, 3 people. One was my grandfather doesn't have a birth certificate. He doesn't know when he was born. This is an issue that was in Lebanon back in the day. So anyway, we don't know how old he is. He just picked the birthday out of that. But let's just say he's 85, right? My grandfather called me up and said, I saw this show. It was Ultimate Fighting, 2 women. The teammates had to fight each other. He said, I watched the whole thing and I loved it. He was talking about The Ultimate Fighter. I didn't see the episode, but I knew exactly what he was talking about. 2 other friends of mine who are not MMA fans say, I was watching the show with 2 coaches that were females. So is it possible that in our little world, in our bubble, this show means nothing, but it still maybe resonates and helps get the UFC out there to the masses? My grandfather sat down and watched a 1-hour episode of The Ultimate Fighter in 2016.
I mean, I can't speak to the second part of that, whether it's really truly resonating, but I would say this. To people who don't know the sport or don't follow the sport, they turn on the TV and they see people fighting, and they might not know the difference between, Daniel Cormier and John Jones squaring off and 2 tough people squaring off. I mean, they'll see the difference in that one's happening in a gym that's essentially empty, and the other is in front of a huge crowd. But still, it's just fighting, and I think that's kind of the thing that the UFC was always banking on, that they would just capture the people's interest in fighting. And so maybe to some extent that still happens, but I think it's to a much lesser extent.
And if you look at the ratings for FS1, it's unclear how much this show costs the UFC to produce, but let's say it averages 350. Is that the number that you said?
It's a little more than that after plus 3 DVR, but the initial airing, yeah.
If you look at the typical original programming, not live event.
Yeah, speak for yourself. What Deadspin calls All Takes Matter is like between 50 and 100,000.
So, I mean, obviously that's probably a cheaper show to produce.
I understand that, but the question is that why not? That means it's good for Fox Sports 1, but it's 350 to 500,000. Is that really good for the UFC? What did Kimbo and Roy Nelson do? That was the high water mark. That was nearly 6 million.
Yeah,
we're talking about less than 10%, closer to 5 of that same audience. I mean, this is a dramatic. Look, I'm not spelling its decline. I'm not saying it's going away tomorrow. It may last a couple more years, or maybe 10 more years. I don't know. But what I can say is I've never seen less enthusiasm for it ever.
All right, okay. What's your 2 or 1 story under the radar thing that you're looking forward to?
I would say I have 2. The first one would be Sage Northcutt's return. I think that's very interesting. Yeah. Obviously coming back from a loss, and they matched him up against Enrique Marin, who was a runner-up of Tough Latin America too. And a lot of people might be writing him off, but he's solid. He's got legit jiu-jitsu skills and good striking. So that's definitely a tough test for Sage Northcutt.
So Marin is from Spain, right?
From Spain, yeah.
He was on the Tough Latin America. So you've seen him fight. Is this a cupcake for Sage? Are they trying to build him up, or does he have a legit chance?
I think that's what the UFC thinks, but I think this is a very competitive fight. I'm not gonna say Marin is gonna win or Sage Northcutt is gonna win, but I do think it's a competitive fight.
It's interesting when you look at that 200 lineup. Marin is literally the only non-named fighter on the card. There's no other non-name. Maybe Thiago Santos, who was just added because that was supposed to be Derek Brunson. But everyone else is Dillashaw, Sunsao. They're all names to a degree.
And Santos has fought on Fox Sports 1.
That is true. Right. But if Marin walked in this room right now, you'd probably know who he is.
Right, yeah.
Jeff definitely doesn't know who he is. Jeff just found out that he's fighting Sage Northcutt.
Who's the Sage guy you're talking about?
Yeah. No, I think that's a great one. What's the other one?
And the other one would be Gray Maynard. He took some time off.
Wow,
he's a former,
great call.
He's a former title challenger, right? He's currently on a 4-fight losing streak. His last win came back in 2012. And, I don't see the UFC keeping him around if he were to lose this fight and have 5 in a row. So this is definitely a career-defining fight for Gray Maynard.
Featherweight fight as well.
No, I think this is a 155. This is against Fernando Bruno, I think it's his name.
You know what's amazing about that? Frankie Edgar is fighting at UFC 200 for the featherweight title. I know it's interim, but let's just call it featherweight because who knows if Connor's going to defend the title again. Think about the second fight between them and where their careers have gone, Frankie and Gray. Gray Maynard is literally fighting for his career in a fight no one's talking about on an FS1 show. And Frankie is as relevant as ever. Possibly if he wins this fight, we'll fight an MSG against Connor. You know what I mean?
And we'll become another one of the 2 division champions.
One of 3.
Major UFC.
Isn't that amazing, right? I mean, how their careers have gone.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And not just that their paths diverged at that moment in time, but that Gray Maynard had him on the ropes. Gray Maynard had him that close to maybe having everything twice exactly, but especially in that first one. And it was the resilience of Edgar that has sort of made him come back. It's sort of a testament to him that even against all odds and tough obstacles, he can sort of persevere and become something great.
Arguably one of the few 10-7 rounds that we've seen in the UFC, right?
Made him mow his lawn out there.
Yes, I've never heard that term.
Never heard that?
What is it?
A fighter said that to me once. There's not famous. There's not a very famous fight. Forrest Petz one time beat Sammy Morgan in the UFC, and one of the scorecards was 30-24. I believe, 30-25. It was like an absurd scorecard. And a famous fighter, I was asking him about it. He goes, yeah, he made him mow his lawn.
I like that.
Yeah.
What are you looking forward to?
Well, I think the choices you guys made are really good, but I don't think you need to go to look that deep to find under the radar. I mean, I feel like there's so much focus being placed on two real title fights, right? Two champions defending their belts, and then of course the interim one. But if you look at this entire card, there are 7 former UFC champions fighting.
The entire weekend?
Just on UFC 200.
200, wow.
And I'm including John Jones. I'm calling him a former champion because I don't recognize interim belts. That's not my, but former champion right there. You can go right down the line. And the one that I think is of all of them who are going under the radar is Cain Velasquez. I mean, this is a guy that people were saying is the baddest man on the planet, and now he's the first fight on the main card of the pay-per-view, and facing a good challenge with Travis Brown. But just all the way through that, just think about it: 7 different people who, we always talk about people ascending to the top of the sport. Well, here are 7 people who have ascended to the top of the sport, and for one reason or another have been temped back down. John Jones, it's not because of his fighting, it's because of his personal life, but he's temped down. Then you get, TJ Dillashaw is fighting. You got, Frankie Edgar is fighting. You got Jose Aldo who's fighting. I mean, these are all people who have seen lesser times through their career recently, and now are trying to build himself up. You guys mentioned Frankie. Frankie's close, and Jose are closer to regaining the glory. But what about Cain Velasquez? Is he gonna regain it? Is TJ Dillashaw gonna regain it? To be seen.
You know what? This whole 3 days, it's really kind of amazing. We didn't talk about Eddie Alvarez. We didn't talk about what happens if Daniel Cormier loses, right? Like all these things. This feels like, every big event has high stakes about what they say about a person's future, generally in some capacity. I feel like this next coming week is like the day, or like, what do you want to call it, the week of reckoning for a lot of fighters' careers about what they're going to actually be and how far they actually can say they went, Yeah. And the last thing about this, you mentioned Cain Velasquez. It's never 1-to-1, right? They're never exactly related. But the fight placement on a card is kind of always fun to examine. And there's Brock Lesnar, the guy that Cain Velasquez waxed in the co-main event role against Mark Hunt. And I'm sorry, I think it would be crazy if it happened, but crazy happens all the time. If he goes up there and starches Mark Hunt, you know how many calls are going to be for a title shot for that guy? It's going to be madness, pandemonium if he wins.
Okay, so you bring up Brock Lesnar. And it will ramp up for sure, and the UFC has a countdown show coming out, and they're doing little things here or there. But do you feel, Danny, what are we, 9 days before his return to the UFC? Like, this is a big deal. Like, Brock Lesnar is going to add a significant amount of pay-per-view buys to 200.
I think so.
Yeah?
Definitely.
You feel people talking about it, buzzing about it?
He's a big name. I feel like also there's enough stars to, get those pay-per-view numbers, but obviously Brock Lesnar doesn't hurt. I think he'll definitely bring up the pay-per-view buys.
I wonder how many he'll bring up, because I think 200 on its own sells itself. It's the only pay-per-view in this day and age that will sell itself just based off of the name alone. 201, 202, 203 aren't selling because they're that number, it's because of who's on the card. But I wonder how much he will add to it at the end of the day.
What I do want to add is I don't think he's going to add as much as he did at the beginning, like the first time, because of course the first time it was novelty. We wanted to see what he looked like. He's already been through that road. He lost a few fights, and he's facing Mark Hunt, who's a very tough challenge. So I'm not sure if he's going to add more buys than he did when he originally went in the UFC.
Yeah, I'm wondering. I don't know whether the numbers will match, but the WWE fan base may or may not have already bought into this. I don't know. I know we always talk about the overlap between MMA and pro wrestling fans, and I'm sure there's a significant overlap, but it has to be much greater when you bring a Brock Lesnar in there. And when you bring a Brock Lesnar who has already proven himself to be a top guy in this sport, but then had a downfall and has an excuse for the downfall because of his illness. And on top of that, he's facing a guy who can hit you once and walk away.
Yeah.
So you put all that together. I think that I think that he is a major ingredient.
And a guy who looks to be in amazing shape, Mark Hunt. I don't know if you've seen him on his Instagram.
Sort of.
Come on, for Mark Hunt?
He's got like the powerlifting abs.
Much better than he has in the past.
Oh, yeah. No, he's definitely an improvement.
But because the fight was put together on, a month's notice,
right.
But clearly he was training before that. He wasn't just sitting around eating KFC.
Well, maybe he was, and he was training.
That's right. You want to add something?
Yeah, no, I just feel like I'm with Danny on this one. I think he definitely is a great boost for them. Even with the situation that happened with you and the news breaking stuff, I feel like that added to it. It's gonna circle back in people's minds when next week kicks off. So that's gonna help a little bit in terms of sales. It's interesting. The producer on my radio show is like a hardcore WWE fan.
Wow.
Right. I mean, he's like mini Dave Meltzer out there. And as you know, I would rather have my genitalia caught in a bear trap.
How do you always come up with these unique
I was waiting for this for
punishments?
What was he going to say?
I would rather that happen than watch pro wrestling. But what he tells me is an interesting theory. He actually thinks Lesnar is more popular than he was the first time he went into WWE. And he thinks that what we're not, the MMA guys, what we're not counting on is how much more enthusiastic that WWE fan base is going to be to watch. I cannot speak to that. I do not know if that is true, but he asserts that was a fair degree of certainty.
Well, I wonder if it's because when he made his UFC debut, he was out of WWE for quite some time.
Right.
Now he's an active member of the WWE roster. Although Stephanie McMahon, who is the daughter and kind of the figurehead now of WWE, said this week that they're not supporting his UFC run, however long it is. He's supposed to compete for them next month at SummerSlam, but the interesting thing is, like, compete, yes. I wonder if the UFC thought that they would get some support. If on Monday Night Raw in front of 3 million people, they would get a push for Brock Lesnar's return to the UFC. If they're not getting that...
I would imagine those details were hammered out contractually.
Yeah, I wonder.
Anyway, just keep that in mind. I'm with him. My theory is that it will be helpful, but not as much as last time. But don't be surprised if it comes out and it blows it out the water,
Other thing to consider, I think back when he was in WWE the first time, sports entertainment was a lot more popular just based off the ratings than it is today. You know what I mean? He was competing in front of more people. Okay, I'll throw out mine. All great ones. The one that it was talked about a couple weeks ago when it happened, but it's obviously dying down now, is the debut of Will Brooks. That to me is just such a fascinating story. The debut of Will Brooks, Bellator lightweight champion, who's kicked to the curb after he doesn't take their contract, signs with the UFC. We talk about NBA free agency coming out. I mean, that was our little mini version. The day he was available at midnight, they're talking to Monty Cox to sign him, and he's fighting Ross Pearson, who isn't. I don't think he's at the level of a Bellator title challenger. A Benson Henderson or maybe even a Josh Thompson, but. We've seen enough guys come over to the UFC who have done well in other organizations and falter in their debut. And so there's a lot riding on this for Will Brooks, a guy who turned down a much more significant contract from Bellator to take a pay cut just to be in the UFC. He wants to be in the UFC. Now we've learned about some of his struggles, coming up. I just love this story. I'm just really curious to see how Will Brooks does. And I think he's a shot in the arm in that division.
I just wonder whether anybody's going to notice. That's the lingering storyline for me going into this coming week. UFC 200 is so loaded that there's going to be a lot of energy devoted toward anticipating that.
Sure.
And not just with Brooks, but even the title fight on the that middle card. That's a really interesting rematch between Jędrzejczyk and Gadella. That's a rematch of a fight that was really, really competitive and could have gone either way. And I'm really looking forward to bad blood, all the ingredients for something that you really want to watch. And is anybody going to really be noticing it? Because after it happens, it's worse than the first one, the first fight card with that's headlined with Dos Anjos and Alvarez, because at least when that one goes down, there's going to be a lot of stories on that middle day recounting that. But I have a feeling that when that women's strawweight fight goes down, the result that is going to be out there on the day of UFC 200, and are people going to be paying attention to it, or are they just going to move on to the next thing?
Well, I think the first time they did this back-to-back-to-back endeavor back in December. Remember, the main event of the first show was Rose Namajunas against Paige Van Zandt, and a lot of people were talking about that. And then the second show was Frankie Edgar versus Chad Mendes. Now that fight, there was a direct correlation between that fight and the McGregor-Aldo fight. So I think people were still...
And it was the main event.
Yeah. So but I think that story continued to the next day.
Right.
Jędrzejczyk versus Gadelha doesn't really continue to UFC 200.
But Tony Ferguson beat Edson Barboza on that Frankie Edgar-Chad Mendes card. And while he had some bumps in the road in terms of getting Khabib to show up and get that fight made, had he faced Khabib and beaten him, that's a guaranteed title shot right there.
Yeah.
So I don't know if Will Brooks will get a title shot if he beats Ross Pearson, but
No.
if it's an exciting fight and he looks good,
Sure.
there is a buoy effect for sure.
Yeah, I think that from a media perspective, like we're all complainers and we're like, oh, this is so much work. I think from a fan perspective, there's something to be said for like, you know, a week in July where there's 3 insane cards back to back to back and a rising tide lifts all boats. I think it's a smart move by the UFC. I haven't heard much about, you know, ticket sales or hotels and things like that, but you'd have to, if McGregor was involved, you know that there's going to be an influx of people traveling in. I don't know if Jones and DC, you know, attract that kind of audience. That's going to be interesting, right? Like the weigh-ins and all, is it going to be the same kind of vibe as when McGregor fought Aldo back in December? So yeah, and I want to ask you guys, like, do you feel? I called it the calm before the storm. Does it feel that way to you,
Yes.
or it does?
Someone was remarking to me, a casual fight fan. He was like, "You know what? I kind of missed missing fights." Like the idea
Isn't that
of
amazing?
there being a break in fights, getting to anticipate it, getting nervous, asking questions, debating in your mind who's going to win, how's it going to play out, talking with your friends, reading online, and then as the week approaches, this fever pitch. He missed that feeling, and so have I. This is great. This is a perfect time to take a pause, enjoy 4th of July or July 1st if you're a loser from the
Yes.
Great White North. I'm teasing. But yeah, I love it. I think it's great.
Well, it's just 2 weeks. That's the amazing thing, right?
We'll take what we can get at this point.
Distance makes the heart grow fonder. It's like in the NFL. When it comes to training camp in July, people are just like foaming at the mouth, and we're celebrating 2 weeks. It's crazy.
But it helps. It helps to
does.
have a little bit of a pause before this avalanche of fights. 35 fights over 3 nights, I believe, was the number that I counted. You know, that's a lot to watch.
Yes.
And there's not a lot to just skip. You know, there are some. I think in the first 2 cards there are definitely some moments that aren't as essential. But if you go and sit down to watch that UFC 200 card, you don't want to skip any of those. I don't, at least.
Right. So you're not going to skip because you usually do skip.
I skip sometimes. Most of the time I'm writing on main events or occasionally a co-main. So my job is to cover those things, and so I'm watching sometimes the early prelims while I'm sitting there, typing up some notes or something just to refresh myself for the big fights. I'm not writing about those. I'm not focusing on those. When there's a fight card that I'm not assigned to write about, I might sit there and watch more of it. But this night I'll definitely be paying attention to the whole thing for sure.
Danny, let me ask you this. One story that's come out about the UFC 200 main event, John Jones, Daniel Cormier, has been John Jones not wanting to have Big John McCarthy as the referee for this fight. John McCarthy, arguably the most famous ref in MMA history, and arguably the greatest ref in MMA history, and he doesn't want him. He doesn't really say why he doesn't want him, but he doesn't want him, clearly. Mm-hmm. And he had his say at the Nevada Athletic Commission hearing, and they didn't listen to his, which is interesting that they wouldn't, but anyhow, they didn't. And then he doubled down later on this week, again saying he doesn't want him there. Is this smart on John Jones's part? I mean, at the end of the day, he is going to be the ref. Should he not have continued talking about this? John is an impartial guy, and I don't think he's gonna, call something for DC that he wouldn't call for John, or vice versa. But was this a smart move on his part?
Well, as you said, I don't think that's going to have any effect on John. But what I do want to say is that when I first listened to that story, when that first came out, I thought John Jones was just being a little bit of a diva and picky. But then after watching that scrum and listening to what he had to say, it makes complete sense. If you're going to fight, and this is the biggest important, this is the biggest fight of your career. This is a career-defining fight. And the guy that's gonna ref your fight, you have tension with, because he did say he had tension or some issues. He didn't really say any details on it. You would want a different referee, right? Because I mean, any little thing helps, and we know that this is a game of inches. So if you were John Jones and you have tension or beef with Big John, I'm sure it makes complete sense to want another referee in your fight.
I was listening to the radio yesterday to the Luke Thomas show. Actually, I was listening to it last night. I was not hearing it live. I heard the rebroadcast over on Sirius, and if I were listening to it live, I probably would have called in with my theory. But instead, I was listening it, and I actually heard somebody say this on your show, and I kind of support it. I think that this all comes down to Cormier complaining about Herb Dean. I think that this is John Jones just trying to play games with Daniel Cormier.
Really? How?
One guy complains about one ref, well, I'm going to complain about the other ref, and it's just, I think, again, I don't think we can read too much into John Jones's process, because I don't think that he's a guy who who thinks things through all that well. I think he's a guy that acts on impulse, and so I think that if we're trying to find the logic behind it, I think that we're going to be fishing around for quite a while. But he didn't really give any kind of specific reasons for why. You know, what did he say? I think on your show you were talking about his energy.
Yeah, he didn't like his energy.
Yeah.
You know what?
Okay, so does he have a right? You know, so you said that you kind of see where he's coming from. There's 3 men in that cage. This is his life, biggest fight of his life. Blah blah blah. Does he have a right to say, please don't ref this fight? I want someone else.
Sure, he has a right to say it. He doesn't have a right to remove a referee who is qualified. I mean, we're not talking about Steve Mazzagatti here. We're not talking about a guy who a lot of people would somewhat subjectively be able to point to things and say, well, this is a guy who has had troubles with this and that, and this is John McCarthy. I mean, just like I had the same opinion when I heard Cormier, you know, having some problem with Herb Dean. These are two best guys doing that job in the sport, and yeah, of course you have a right to complain about it, but show us some reason. Show us some reason why this person shouldn't be refereeing your fight. Otherwise, forget about it.
I can tell Luke is just like, you're about to explode. You want to say something so badly about this.
I just believe that if you really think sincerely that there's a problem and you can't argue for it, then there is no problem.
Well, maybe he just doesn't want to say it publicly.
Well, why not? You're accusing someone of either incompetence or a bias to the point of not being able to do their job competently. So what is the issue here, right? And I read what he said, and I was like, there's no argument here. And I tweeted that. And I must have been right, because his manager tweeted me going, you don't know his argument because he didn't make one. Right. Right. He didn't actually make one. So people called my show and they were like, you know, if you were getting, let's say, like, you know, important surgery and you didn't like the doctor, you would get a new one. Yeah, I would, but you can go get a second opinion. This is like showing up to the DMV and being like, I don't like this person who's doing the vision test. Okay, well, are they doing the vision test inappropriately? Are they unable to do this job correctly? No. Put your dumbass eyeballs on the glass and tell me if you see an A or an E.
Right.
This is a really simple. You have to demonstrate that they can't do the job effectively, or that they shouldn't be. That you can't trust them to be able to do the job effectively. They shouldn't be in this role, and that they can't actually do it. I couldn't, for example, actually fulfill the tasks if somehow they asked me to do it. I could not actually do it. There's no argument here. There's literally no argument here. If it is so problematic that they have to switch, demonstrate it to us. Give us a reason. There is none. So my guess is, not merely is he trying to play mind games with Daniel Cormier.
I don't get the Cormier part.
Well,
how does this affect Cormier at all?
These guys live and die in their own minds about the inches that you referenced earlier.
Sure.
I also think it's like a warning shot to Big John, which is, we are letting you know we're going to be watching everything that you do in this.
Okay,
in this
so
fight.
that's a great point, because remember, let's equate this to the NBA Finals. Remember Game 6 of the NBA Finals, Stephen Curry complained, Steve Kerr complained about the officiating, and Kerr was fined $25,000. And everyone's saying that was the best $25,000 that he could have spent, because now he complained about the refs and they're going to try to help him out in Game 7, blah, blah, blah. Is it possible that he's doing this because Big John has warned him about the eye pokes, has warned him about a bunch of things, is a lot more aggressive as a referee, and in a way this kind of plays mind games with Big John and lets him know that, look, I'm saying this and that, maybe now he'll be more favorable. Like, maybe this was all orchestrated by Team Jones to try to mess with Big John.
That's my guess. My guess is that, or that in the event that something goes wrong in this fight, they can go back to the commission and be like, we told you. We warned you up front that this was not going to go well. But the truth is, he's reffed his, Gustafsson fight, Machida fight, and the first there's 3 fights he's reffed. Gustafsson, Machida, I forget the other one.
Belfort?
Belfort, yes. In fact, the Belfort one was the one that people have pointed to as maybe having an issue. He won all 3. And no one can really point to me except for the one incident about him coming out on all fours at the Belfort fight. But other than that, if you believe a commission official is incapable of doing their job, you mentioned, do they have a right? Yes, you do. But you also have a responsibility to then demonstrate why they should be removed from this task.
I just finished watching the O.J. Simpson 30 for 30.
It's amazing.
Tremendous. Unbelievable. It took me a long time to finish it, but I got through it.
I'm in the middle of it. Don't tell me how it turns out.
It's 10 hours long.
Yes, but there's one interesting thing about it, and this is not common to that case, but it got me thinking, believe it or not, about this. The defense and the prosecution have to essentially agree on the jury, right? Like, they can both have a say in the matter.
Yes, voir dire.
So can John Jones and Daniel Cormier come together and have a say on who the ref is? You know, like, do they both, if one doesn't agree with the ref, a fight of this magnitude, as you said, should it be that both of them have to, if there's one thing you're going to agree on, it's who the third man is?
I suspect that probably happens in boxing with
Floyd.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's I don't think it's smart. I think Luke's making the point that I'm making as well. It's tell me what it is that this guy does that is not capable of. Is he capable of doing the job? End of argument. That's it. Can he do the job? And if you don't like his demeanor, if John McCarthy barks at him to, hey, come on, get your fingers out of his face, or whatever. He doesn't say it nicely. He doesn't speak to him in a nice tone of voice. Tough luck, man. This is a fight game. This is everybody's livelihood. This is Daniel Cormier's livelihood too. This is John McCarthy's livelihood. You cannot just throw stuff out there and hope that it sticks. And if you do, I agree with you. There was some gamesmanship there. Maybe it's with Cormier, maybe it's with McCarthy, but there's no there.
Yeah, but again, going back to your point, I do feel like if one competitor is uncomfortable, and I've asked Malky, like, what's the issue? And the only thing I've gone back is we're working on it and we're trying to fix it. We don't know for a fact that he hasn't written to the commission and said this, that, and the other thing are the reasons why I don't want Big John there. And I think that there is something, sure, it'd be nice if he told the world what the issues are, but there is something to be said for, look, if there's bad mojo in there, if I feel uncomfortable, can't we just get someone else? I don't know.
How is that substantively different than I don't like your face? It's not different from that at all.
No, I'm saying
it's flimsy.
Yeah, no. If he had a legitimate reason, he said in this case, in that case, in this case, could they come together and say, all right, we're going to agree on having, referee X, Jason Herzog, in there? Should a fight of that magnitude have that stipulation? Should they have that right?
The only comfort, sorry, Jeff, the only comfort you should be able to draw is whether your safety is going to be protected and the rules are going to be enforced. You have to demonstrate that those are in jeopardy. Where is that? I don't like your energy. Oh, thanks, Deepak Chopra, but that's not really what we're evaluating here.
Sure.
I don't have a problem with Jones withholding specifics in his scrum with the media. I don't have a problem with any fighter or any official not telling us in the media something. And if he told some things to the commission that he didn't tell us, that's fine. But the way he expressed it to the media suggests to me that there is no substance here, because if the case were otherwise, he would have said, I'm not going to get into the specifics of it, but we have very specific things about John McCarthy's way of refereeing a fight that we take issue with. I'm not going to tell you what those things are because I don't feel like that's necessary, but we've expressed it to the commission. That's what would have happened. Instead, if you talk about energy and the way it just comes down to something that sounds like a personality clash, and that's just not enough.
Final word on this?
No, I agree 100% with Jeff. I think John Jones doesn't have a responsibility to tell the media or the fans what the issue is, but of course, if he wants to get that change, he has to let the commissioner know what the deal is.
Yeah. Okay, let's take a quick break from the UFC talk and let's put a bow on this Bellator Dynamite 2 show that happened last Friday in St. Louis. Because I thought it was interesting. I thought the ratings, which didn't seem all that spectacular, was at around 600,000. Were not probably what they expected. I thought the MMA version was, pretty interesting and pretty entertaining, and the kickboxing version was a whole different story. But after two events, were you at the first one?
Yes.
You weren't at the second.
No.
After two events, two Bellator Dynamite events, one in September, one in June, is this an experiment worth continuing for Bellator? Is this moving in the right direction? Do you like it? Do you like having the mixed shows?
I don't think you need to pull the plug on the experiment, but it clearly needs some work. I feel like Bellator momentum has ground to a halt. I don't think that there's nearly the amount of buzz around this one that there was in the first one. Someone asked me on Twitter the other day, like, has there ever been a Bellator event where there was buzz and it wasn't Kimbo involved? Yeah, the first Dynamite show. Now, it may not have worked out, but I recall local advertising all over town. I remember sitting in a diner getting coffee by myself, And I remember people sit down and the bartender or the person making omelets asked them what they were here for, and they're like, "Oh, we're here for the Bellator fights."
Wow.
I'd never heard that in my life, you know, and it was just crazy to hear, and stuff like that all over town. So there was definitely a real buzz about it. There is something to be said about the spectacle of the cage and the ring, but they have not figured out that formula at all. There's an argument to be made that, you know, trying to get to the kickboxing side and build stars there is a way to, you know, not have the UFC compete with them. At the same time, this is a sport that has never worked here. I don't know that it can't ever, but it hasn't ever. And so you're investing all those resources rather than building the real Bellator MMA brand. You're putting it behind kickboxing. I'm not saying it can't work. I think there might be some ways to make it work. But, you know, putting Joe Schilling versus Hisaki Kato after 11 p.m. on the East Coast, I mean, you want to talk about malpractice? What on earth were they thinking about that? That was so bad. And then having a guy named J-Ho fight a fight between 8 and 11, it's just madness. So I'm not ready to pull the plug on it, but Bellator needs to figure something out. At 600,000, yeah, that's not good.
Yeah, Luke's talking about the buzz that was surrounding the first one of these things, and all I can remember from that, and what I remember seeing in the lead into it, was not the names of any fighters, but I remember that image, that photograph. Actually, it wasn't even a photograph. I think it was a rendering. It was a rendering of a cage and a ring, and I remember thinking, wow, this is sort of interesting, but I don't remember anything. You know, now looking back, I can remember some of the fighters that were involved, but that was not the point at the time. It seemed like the point of the promotion was, we're going to do this, and they did it, and you know, it had whatever level of success it did. They do it again, and I think they need to say, well, the interesting thing about this is not that we've got a cage and a ring. The interesting thing is we have some really good fighters or some really good fights out here, and make that the story. And I don't think that they really did a great job of that, even in the lead-in to it. I know we were getting the return of Rampage Jackson, and the fight didn't live up to whatever expectations people might have had. Even low expectations, I don't think it lived up to those. And some of the other things, I mean, you know, Schilling in a kickboxing match, there were certainly some things that you could have pointed to that might have been a success, and I just don't feel like it was there. I don't think it delivered. I think when you put two different kinds of sports there, you should be expected to deliver more than just an MMA event or a kickboxing event.
I don't think it necessarily is a bad idea that they have both kickboxing and MMA, but what I would like to say is I would like them to try maybe have the kickboxing card first as opposed to mixing the fights up, because I think that's confusing. Just online on Twitter, I was seeing a bunch of different results come up every 2 minutes. So maybe have the kickboxing card earlier and then the MMA, and also lower down the amount of bouts, because there was a ridiculous amount of fights.
Yeah, well, for the prelims, correct me if I'm wrong, they do the kickboxing and the MMA at the same time. That's just madness.
That's okay.
What's that like in the arena?
I don't know. I skipped that part when I was the first time.
Well, they don't show that.
Oh, the fights are happening at the
same time for the prelims, which is just like, that just feels like noise. To me, it feels very disjointed because, look, Bellator is obviously the #2 promotion. There is a gap between Bellator and the UFC. That being said, if you just look at the MMA fights Friday night, those are pretty solid fights. You know, those featured Rampage, who's a name. I know he's not the Rampage of old, but still, the Mitrione fight was entertaining. The freaking Michael Chandler knockout, I mean, that...
KO of the year.
Yeah, so those were entertaining fights. And then it feels like we're going from this level of MMA to this level of kickboxing. You know, like they're putting in people that don't have stellar records, don't have stellar resumes. It's disjointed. It feels like we're going up and down, up and down. We are emotionally invested. For the most part, who's tuning into Bellator on Friday night? It's MMA fans, you know. So we are emotionally invested in the story of Matt Mitrione, of Michael Chandler trying to get the title back, of the return of Rampage, and then we don't know a lot about these kickboxing fighters. So it feels like a roller coaster, and also, you know, to do this thing where you have a mixed show, and then to do another broadcast afterwards of just kickboxing, that felt weird as well. I think that if you're going to do a show like this, you can't do it twice within a calendar year. I mean, that's a mistake in its own right. You can't have one in September and then one in June. That just feels like overkill. And if you are going to do it once a year, let's say, or once every 2 years, it has to feel like the freaking Super Bowl. It has to be like, you need to get Rico Verhoeven on that. You need to get legends of kickboxing. It can't just be these 1-0, you know.
the fairness, the kickboxing bouts had like at least one good fighter in each of the bouts.
Sometimes. I mean, the female fights were not the level of the MMA fights.
Okay, I should say one good fighter or one attractive female. How
That's
about
the
that?
thing. It feels like you're not watching high-level kickboxing.
Certainly not. And then you could have done that with Joe Schilling. Now, even though he lost, he was commanding that fight, and he's got a bigger name, and people know who he is. It's not just that. Like the other part is like it's like they're copying the oversaturation model that UFC sort of grew into a little bit. That's made it less of an issue these days. But like for example, like they'll have a show the week before, a bigger show, just as like an advertising for the next week.
Yeah.
But that other show feels completely dead. You have to use at least one or two good fighters on it, which winds up making the other card thin. And the other part that kills me is like, we complain about NFL games going 3.5 hours. You know, basketball games, was it 2.5 hours, depending on how it goes. And these promoters in MMA are like, how can we make an MMA event last a week straight? How do we waste more of your time rather than let's condense this and make this a bomb that goes off? It's just a sparkler that you wave around. Here's my July 4th imagery that you just wave around until it kills all. It's depressing and slow.
Well, my wife doesn't know a whole lot about mixed martial arts, but I was watching it, and then I told her Rampage was coming on. She knows who Rampage is, obviously, and so she said, "Oh, I'm going to watch this." And then she said, "Okay, is that it? Like, is the show?" And it was 10:40, and I said, "Yeah, that's the main event." And that, I mean, the Ottawa card the week before started at 10:30, the main card. You know, so if that was just the card, it would have been great. But then there was a whole other kickboxing card afterwards, and that just is asking for a lot, in my opinion, of your audience. That may be the least of their worries. To me, they need to figure out, if they're going to keep doing this, how to make the two sports, the two products flow. And I don't think there is a way. I really don't. Unless you're going to do the kickboxing fights in a cage, and I don't even know if that's the answer. I think that this is something that the audience just doesn't want, and they're being force-fed.
What you just suggested, putting the kickboxers in the cage, I don't know whether that would be considered a sacrilege by the kickboxing establishment, but
the diehard
at least,
establishment.
I mean, I know it takes away. I think that the whole idea of the cage and the ring in the arena at the same time, I don't find that so interesting. I haven't been to either of these events. You were there live for one of them, but it seems to me that if I've got a really great seat right in front of the cage, then I've got a really crappy seat for the kickboxing because it's down, you know, it's 40 feet to the left or something. So I'm not that excited by that, and maybe if they did that, but it seems to me it's all about fighters, you know, and if you're going to be putting on two different sports, that gives you an opportunity to shrink it down and get the best few kickboxers we can get and the best MMA fighters and put them together, and that should be the opportunity instead of expanding it out over, you know, a 2-week period of TV viewing.
I'm told that like this kickboxing stuff is good for them to take to Europe, right? For the Bellator brand to expand into Europe. I'm told that the Bellator ratings, if you look at some of Viacom's properties and how they've been evaluated, now that Viacom is having this incredible shake up at the top with their leadership, that Bellator is one of the few things they point to internally as a success. So like we're sitting here bemoaning that, but we should also acknowledge that the people who are looking at this as a financial investment see a lot of upside for Bellator. But that being said, if you're drawing 600,000 with your, you know, the first Dynamite show I didn't think worked exactly, but it felt big at the outset. This never felt big to me. This felt like
a Friday night
show. There was nothing big about it at all. And that's really what, if you're going to turn your marquee show into that, you need to fix your marquee show.
Yeah, also I will say, you know, Strikeforce enjoyed a lot of success when Scott Coker in 2006 said essentially, like, I'm going to focus on this MMA stuff, right? And Bellator obviously hasn't been around as long as Strikeforce was around and didn't have the home base that San Jose was to Strikeforce and all that stuff going for it. But I don't know if Bellator is in the position right now to start expanding into other sports. And, you know, I want to see Viacom, the owner of Bellator, to really focus, and maybe I'm biased because I cover MMA and love MMA more than kickboxing, but like, let's focus on growing this brand first. You know, like, let's not put...
You paid for it.
Yeah, let's not put our resources into growing a whole other sport and finding new talent in that sport and getting into bidding wars with Glory. Let's focus on making Bellator a great thing because it's flawed at this point. You know, it has its highs, it has some great fighters, it has some great up-and-coming fighters, Michael Venom Page, Darian Caldwell. These are great fighters that you can build on. Michael Chandler. The kickboxing stuff just feels like it's getting in the way at this point.
I mean, there's a reason why kickboxing hasn't really worked here in America for many years. Yeah. So for Bellator to try to expand and try to catch up with the UFC and the MMA, and at the same time work on this difficult task of getting kickboxing out there, I think they're biting more than they can chew.
Well said. I also wonder, final point on this, if back in the day with Strikeforce, Scott had something that the UFC didn't have, and that was women's MMA. He had Gina, he had Cyborg, he had a lot, Misha Tate, and now the UFC has that. So what does the UFC have? What does the UFC not have that Bellator can have? It's kickboxing, because they have everything else. So maybe that's their way of trying to attract a new audience. Okay, I want to talk to you guys quickly about the BJ Penn suspension that came out on Monday. So it comes out that he gets a 6-month suspension, retroactive to the end of March. So he'll be ready to return and able to return in September. Considering what we knew about this case, considering the fact that it was an IV and he didn't know, and they said that okay, he was cooperative, so that it lessens his suspension. Is this a fair punishment for BJ?
Yeah, the 6-month thing I think is fine. The stuff he was taking, glutathione, it is not on the water prohibited list. It does have real medicinal benefits, obviously, but not ones that have been determined to be performance enhancing. He did it under a doctor's supervision. Now, he did it, of course, in ways that don't comport with the rules that he agreed to with USADA testing. 6 months is not a back-breaking amount of time. He has no real financial problems. I'm sure he has competitive juices and all that, right? But that is a bendable but not broken situation. I still believe that UFC and USADA could have done a much better job of getting out in front of this. But the 6 months is something I think all these guys can live with.
What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. It was self-reported as well. It was
right.
It was it's not a PED, and it seemed to me more of a lack of understanding of what the rules were than a purposeful skirting of the rules. At least that was the perception I took from it, and I suspect that's the perception that the commission took as well.
Let me ask you this, Danny. He wanted to debut a return in March. That didn't happen. He wanted to fight Nick Lentz. That didn't happen. He was going to fight Dennis Seaver in June. That didn't happen. He was then going to fight Cole Miller in June. That didn't happen. Come September, do you still care to see this? He called out GSP this week. Do you care to see the return of BJ Penn at this point? I
do, because I think it's interesting that he's training in Albuquerque, and I think that truly has an impact on his performance, because we know that BJ has had issues with training camps, and in Albuquerque they don't mess around. So I would like to see his return. I wouldn't like to see him return against GSP. I think that wouldn't be.
You would not like?
No, not at all. I think I would like to see him just stick at 145. Okay. GSP is just way too big. I mean, GSP's talking about fighting at middleweight.
Yeah.
And essentially BJ Penn is a featherweight.
Right.
So I would like to see him stick in that weight class and get a tune-up fight, like a Cole Miller, a guy that's a veteran that's been around and has a name, or Dennis Seaver. I would like to see that.
You shook your head when I said GSP.
I mean, what is BJ?
Just scrap.
Just scrap, yeah. Just stop. How about that?
So
just stop.
You don't want to see this anymore?
I said it before. I was so wrong about Arlovsky's rebound, whatever you want to call it. There was some debate yesterday about it, a rebound resurgence, whatever. But I was wrong about that in terms of what he could do, and so you have to give the benefit of the doubt to the real master of mixed martial arts and Greg Jackson. Okay, fine. But if he looks bad in that one, come on. If you're asking me, even then, it's like I can't make a critical comment. But like, are you asking me? I'm excited. It's like, no, these guys have expiration dates.
Yeah.
You're like, this milk turned to yogurt. Just eat yogurt.
Yeah.
Right. I don't want to eat yogurt. I wanted the milk, and it feels like a little bit of that. But we'll see.
You want to see the GSP fight? A trilogy.
No, I want to. If BJ Penn is coming back
for an interim title.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. If BJ Penn is coming back, it has to be for the right fight. It has to be a fight that doesn't. I just don't want him to bite off more than he can chew, and I think that would be way more than he can chew.
Well, that was the theme in the Frankie Edgar fight, right? It's like the same thing all over again. I like the fact that they recognize that, look, he's not the BJ of old. He needs to build himself back up. Here's Dennis Seaver. Like, that was the perfect fight for me. And so maybe they'll try to, resurrect that one. The GSP fight seems, and it's also clunky, as you said, at 155. I don't even want to see GSP at 155 in this day and age either. Forget about fighting BJ.
Can you imagine another greasing scandal again? Another non-greasing scandal, or semi-greasing scandal, I should say. That was such an ugly part of the rematch. It sort of shrouded the GSP's larger achievement. I just can't. I can't do it anymore. I just can't do it.
Okay, a game of true or false. True or false? UFC. Why did that surprise you so much?
You didn't put this on the liner notes about the show.
Trust me. Sometimes I know that you guys are able to adjust.
Here we go.
Man, here we
True
go.
or false? UFC 202 is better than UFC 200.
Ooh.
What do you say?
Better than give me a
It's a better card.
No. UFC 200 does
I
not.
asked you for true or false.
Oh,
You didn't
false.
give me okay.
Sorry.
Why?
Oh, you didn't ask me. Oh, because as I said earlier, and we all
Maybe I
said
should have put
earlier,
this on there.
you go to top to bottom of 200. There's not a fight on that card that doesn't interest me.
Okay, I should add 202 is not done yet. So
Okay.
perhaps I should say true or false, Danny. UFC 202 is shaping up to be a more interesting card than UFC 200.
True.
Whoa, here we go.
It's interesting because I feel like a lot of matchups at UFC 200 are very predictable. The Miesha Tate, Amanda Nunes. I feel
Famous
like
last words. Watch him.
Trust me, don't make that mistake. I have made that one before.
And there's other matchups. Brock Lesnar's return against Mark Hunt.
Predictable for who?
For Hunt.
Okay, we'll remember that one.
Oh man,
Young Daddy going out on a limb.
Save this footage.
Write this down.
Well, I think Mark Hunt's gonna win.
Sure, of course. Yes.
I think obviously the John Jones DC matchup, that's a rematch.
Predictable?
That's semi-predictable. Yeah.
Wow.
Semi-predictable, yeah. But when you look at 202, I mean, maybe a Diaz McGregor 2 that's predictable, but I mean, try to predict Glover Teixeira and Anthony Johnson.
Yeah.
Try to predict Dong Hyun Kim versus Neil Magny, or Donald Cerrone and Rick Story, or
Carlos Condit,
Damian Maia. Those are interesting fights that can go either way. If any of those guys win, I mean, it wouldn't be a crazy idea. Now, if you told me Brock Lesnar defeated Mark Hunt, that would be crazy.
Yeah.
So I think is a more interesting card as far as like the matchups are more even and more competitive.
Makes a good point.
He does.
He backed it up really well.
The Young Buck did well.
Yeah.
Why do people think Brock Lesnar's being led to the gallows on this one? I don't. Do y'all seen the odds on this one? They're close to even. They're close to even. Faraz Zahabi, by the way, Canada's own. July 1st.
Montreal's own.
Montreal's own.
Yes.
There we go. An esteemed scholar of the
Yes.
sport thinks Brock Lesnar is going to trounce him. I don't know that I shared that.
In those words, like he thinks it's a
I think
foregone
he gives him a
conclusion?
20% chance, Mark Hunt.
Wow.
Yeah, that's it.
Wow.
He's like, once Lesnar gets him on the ground, which he will with ease, he's going to smash him.
Wow.
Go watch the video. He put it on his, and it's a 40-minute video where he explains his reasoning. Now, look, we can all be wrong. MMA is hard to predict. I'm just saying the idea, Danny Segura, that Lesnar's just going to get, smashed. He might get smashed. That's entirely possible. But it's very reasonable to believe that the 200 card, to your point, is very competitive. I don't know what's going to happen with Kat Zingano. Yeah. Frankly, I don't even know what's going to happen with Johnny Hendricks and Kelvin Gastelum. You want to talk about two guys who have a lot to prove? Wow. Now, Travis Brown, Cain Velasquez, I think is a little more, I'm pretty leaning heavily Cain. But I don't know what's going to happen with Lesnar. I think John Jones is going to win, but he looked kind of shoddy in his last one. Not great. You go down the line, Jose Aldo, Frankie Edgar, what? This is madness. This is total madness. So to me, I don't disagree that 202 has its own special, unique character as well, especially that main event. But 200 is the best card maybe the UFC's ever made.
Yeah, I agree with you that 200 is a lot more unpredictable than young Danny thinks. I think here's what I'll say about 202. 202 feels like it has a theme to it. There's a lot of welterweight fights on that card, which I like. Obviously, Glover Rumble isn't, but the rest of the big fights are all welterweight fights. And it feels like these are fights that have sort of come together. I know Diaz and McGregor came out of nowhere, but now there's a story, and this is something that's been building. 200 to a degree is just a bunch of, not for lack of a better word, cobbled together. I mean, like, who saw Mark Hunt and Brock Lesnar come together? Some of these fights are just, let's just put two guys in there. So 202 feels like it's something that has been building. 200 felt like, let's just try to make the biggest, most crazy card of all time. And that's why I can understand why you say 202. I don't know if there's a right answer here, but I can understand why you say 202 is a more intriguing card to you, feels more important. I get that. I don't think it's a crazy statement.
I think you can also, one of the things we mocked John Jones earlier for talking about energy with John McCarthy. I will say this. I think that 202 has potential for the energy in the arena to be higher than 200 because of, mainly because of the main event and everything leading up to that. While I don't think it's a fight that has so much significance going forward, it's not really, neither of those guys is going to be a welterweight, top guy in the welterweight division, and that's where they're fighting. But still, we got Conor McGregor, the biggest star in the sport, and you got Nate Diaz, a guy who, based upon his fight with Conor, is right on his tail in terms of star power and, I think competitively it'll be a really interesting fight this time if McGregor has a different strategy going in. So I think the energy with the passion for each of those guys is going to be bigger than the passion for anybody that's competing at 200. So I think the crowd energy might lean in his direction, but still I think the fight card is at 200 is just hard to top.
I mean, 200 has the star powers, right? But as far as like intriguing matchups, I mean, Damian Maia, Carlos Condit, I like those matchups better, and that's more intriguing to me than say like a Lesnar and Hunt.
I would agree with that last part. You know, think about what you got. He mentioned Story and Cerrone, or Magny and Dong Hyun Kim. These are guys in their prime, again at the elite level, battling for every inch. That's hard to find, but. Nevertheless, I still think 200 has a ton of value, namely not merely star power, but from competitiveness on its own sake.
Two quick things. A, I mean, this is a good argument for the UFC, right? I mean, like the fact that we're even comparing these two things, they're both amazing cards. And B, I will say though, one thing that 202 has that 200 doesn't have is that I think people are supremely emotionally invested in the McGregor-Diaz story. They have incredibly loyal fan bases, probably two of the most loyal in the sport's history, right? And I think that fight has more passion surrounding it and invested in it than any fight on 200. Fair?
More so than the first fight between those guys. Because,
totally. I mean, it's only
now
grown.
we've seen a guy. We've seen Nate handle him.
Yeah.
But we know McGregor is a guy who took this seriously. I mean, McGregor really. He's the reason why the second fight is happening, because he's so invested in it, and that makes it interesting.
Okay, let's end on this. There is no MMA Beat next week because we're going to be swimming in International Fight Week madness. So I wanted to end on this because we were kind of celebrating the history of the UFC as you approach this 200th show. It's really not the 200th show. I believe it's. What did I tweet? 63 or something like that. I want to get from you guys. I want to get three things from you guys before we go. All right, and I did give you a heads up on this, so hopefully you did your homework. Between UFC 100 and UFC 200, what's your favorite fight, event, and moment? That stretch. Woo!
Whoa.
2009 to 2016, 7-year stretch, the craziest stretch in UFC history. Obviously, a lot more happened in that. That 7-year stretch than the previous 7 years, obviously. But is there a fight, a moment, and event that sticks out?
I'm going to go with a big theme here.
Okay.
So biggest fight for me. This is tons of great choices you can make. Going to be Lesnar versus Carwin.
UFC 116.
Oh man, I just remember I tried to live blog that. It remains in the annals of embarrassing history because I was literally just huffing and puffing, typing as Carwin was laying down the roughest back massage on earth, and then somehow Lesnar just came back, and it was just incredible. Like MMA always feels small. And that's okay that it feels small, but most of the time it's a small event. It's a small show. It's a regional show. Most UFC events are not these grandiose things, but that just felt so big. It felt so big. Not my favorite moment, but another huge moment. I don't know how you could place anything above it in terms of the bigness of it all. UFC by Strikeforce. I know it's not an event exactly, but it's a moment in time.
No, it's a great call.
March 2011, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, I'll never forget that. I'll never forget your interview. I'll never forget where I was. I had just gotten out of the shower and I looked at my phone and I go, what? I just couldn't believe it. It
changed the course of the sport.
Oh my
changed
goodness.
Everything. Could you imagine if Strikeforce was still around with that momentum that they had after the show in New Jersey?
And that changed MMA in fundamental ways. Look at what it did when Rousey became a UFC champion, then became a UFC star. It fundamentally altered the sport in all kinds of ways. So that was big as well. And I guess the other big one for me, like big event between 100 and 200. This one I kind of struggled with a little bit, but probably I'm just going to say because of the bigness of it all, Ronda Rousey's debut, UFC debut.
157.
157. 156 for some reason.
Against
I'm not saying there's other great choices that they're going to make. I'm sure that they are. But the bigness of that, the uniqueness of that.
It felt historic.
It felt super historic. And I was like, wow, we are here to witness this from soup to nuts. Crazy.
Great choices. What do you got?
Yeah, that was good. The fight that stands out for me was one that I think was mentioned earlier in the show, Frankie Edgar against Gray Maynard 3. And part of it is because of what happened in 2. I think that rematch when when Maynard just mauled Edgar in that first round of the second fight, and then Edgar fought back and fought back and fought back, and then ended up in a draw. You know, it was like I can just remember the arena kind of like sighing. You know, there was no resolution. We needed something resolution. And as you probably remember, the UFC was going to award, who was it? Somebody else
Anthony
was going to
Pettis.
get. Pettis was going to get the
UFC
next shot.
125.
Was going to get the next shot at Edgar, but then because really within that night they reconsidered and went to a Maynard fight again. And when that happened, and Maynard came out and dropped Edgar in that first round of the third fight, after Edgar had come out and tried to take him down, and Maynard grabbed the fence, so prevented the takedown. Then he drops Maynard. I mean, he drops Edgar, and then Edgar fights back, and of course, in the end, knocks him cold. Which it was just the most exhilarating fight, and just the back and forth of it was
such a clean knockout. I remember him up against the cage. I actually have the picture right over there. You can't see it, but that's Edgar celebrating.
It was just a fabulous because it almost felt as though. That was in the fourth round, so it really felt like there was a 9-round fight that finally had a resolution because of the draw the first time. So that
UFC 136 in
yes,
Houston, Texas.
136. That was the one. The moment for me, actually, there were two. One mostly. The biggest one for me was when Anderson Silva fell down. When Chris Weidman, was in there with him, and Silva started clowning as he'd always clowned before. And he hit him with that. He got that back swing that kind of just threw off the timing of Silva, and then he clocked him. I just remember, and I think I've told the story before, that I was on vacation, staying in a cabin on a lake, and I went to a nearby inn and was in there using their Wi-Fi and was going to write something, and it was 1 a.m, and I'm sitting in this inn, and when that landed, I let out a scream, woke up the entire inn, probably woke up all the cabins on the lake. It was just a moment that was so unexpected because even though I and everybody else knew that Weidman had the tools to defeat Anderson Silva, it was hard to fathom that to actually happen just because he had been so dominant. And when it happened, it was just a stunning moment. The other moment that I also really loved was Ronda Rousey when she defeated Kat Zingano, I think 16 seconds, and she went over to her to console her because it was one of those, Rousey has a reputation of being this cold-hearted woman who, and it's an well-earned reputation because of the way she's interacted with Miesha Tate mostly. But when she went over to her to console her, I thought that was a really great moment that had nothing to do with the fighting, but it was really a great moment. Lastly, the fight card. The one that I'm going to go with is UFC 152. Partly because it was the.
That is the most bizarre choice ever.
Yeah,
the Toronto card.
Yes,
okay.
and I'm going to explain why for a few reasons.
This is Jones Gustafson?
Yeah, no, this is Jones Belfort after the canceled
right.
card.
What am I saying?
First of all, it was the UFC getting back on the horse after having their first cancellation ever. And then it was not a main event that was really much anticipated. I think Belfort was kind of seen as being a guy that was overmatched, and he ultimately ended up being. But that was the fight. We talked about Gustafson as being the guy who gave Jones the biggest beating, but this was the fight where Jones came the closest to actually losing a fight. I mean, I remember when Belfort locked in that armbar, and I remember thinking, oh my God. I mean, this was just like unbelievable that this was happening. And you just could watch almost like in slow motion as Jones tried to work his way out of it and did get out of it, but of course, did some damage to himself and then fought on with a damaged elbow and won it. So it was not the deepest card, which is why you would, I agree with you. It's a kind of a strange choice because it was not an incredibly deep card, but it included John Jones's coming nearest to defeat, and it also in the co-main had the crowning of the first UFC flyweight champion, Demetrius Johnson, who has proved to be, now he's, at least in my book, the #1 pound-for-pound guy in the sport. And it was a really, really close fight, a split decision over Benavidez. And I thought that just on the strength of those two, it was an eventful event for me.
So probably favorite event, I don't want to sound too basic, but probably UFC 196. It just felt really big. It felt like a massive event, and it was just a roller coaster and a very dramatic event.
Conor McGregor, Nate Diaz.
Yeah, Conor McGregor, Nate Diaz, and Miesha Tate and Holly Holm. Just after the Miesha Tate, Holly Holm is like, wait, we have
Yeah.
one more fight, and it's
Yeah.
Diaz versus McGregor, and just the way those two fights went and their endings was very memorable. And I remember having friends that are not into MMA whatsoever asking me questions about Diaz and McGregor, and they all watched the fight and they were talking about it weeks after. So, and just the way that event felt, that was probably the most memorable event for me, my favorite event. As far as a fight, I'm going to go back to UFC 139, Dan Henderson versus Shogun Rua. That fight was amazing. Both guys were still in their prime, maybe towards the end of their prime, but they were still title contenders.
End of their prime. Dan Henderson's about to get a title shot.
Well, that's mostly because of Michael
1,000 years
Bisping.
later.
But
He's not in his prime.
I know.
yeah.
End of his second prime.
Right,
Right.
right.
His third prime.
And it was just a ridiculous
He's
fight.
subprime.
It was something wild, and it's a sort of fight that, like, you know, you get two Pride guys, and there was that nostalgia there that, you know, it was a Pride fight, and they've never faced each other, which was kind of bizarre. You know, fighting in Pride and having the names that they have. As far as like favorite moment, I would say perhaps Robbie Lawler and Rory McDonald stare down. I think that's gonna go down in history.
Yeah.
Both guys very bizarre, very intense in their own way. And just the way they were staring at each other, there was something there, something
Yeah,
special.
that was amazing. What a great photo. You know what's amazing? 9 answers, not one duplicate. And none of mine are the same as yours.
Yours are.
Isn't that amazing though that we didn't pick the same thing and we didn't talk about this beforehand? Okay, so my favorite fight of the past 7 years is John Jones, Alexander Gustafsson, UFC 165.
I almost went with that one.
I remember the first round, Gustafsson taking him down, and because you remember that week in Toronto and all around the MMA world, we were like, "There's no chance. Like he has no chance." And of course, later on, we find out that John Jones is partying and really not taking this fight seriously, and even telling himself on the way to the cage, "I'm going to lose my belt." Like he had no confidence in himself. He did no preparation, and Gustafsson capitalized, and he's made a name for himself off of that one fight. I remember him taking John down in the first round, being like, "What the heck is going on?" And it continued. And that fourth round, where John dug deep and said, "Not today, my friend." It's amazing we haven't seen the rematch yet. We might get it at some point. But that, to me, being there in Toronto and witnessing that, and John just digging a little deeper, and remember that picture, Esther Lynn, our great photographer, getting that picture of Gustafsson on his coach's shoulder, crying on his shoulder afterward, just completely spent. And then the picture afterwards in the hospital of them together. I mean, that was just holy moly. To me, along with the Dan Henderson Shogun Rua fight, greatest fights in UFC history. Favorite moment? I don't want to call it favorite, but just a moment where I remember just like my mouth dropped and I couldn't believe what was happening. Holly Holm knocking out Ronda Rousey, just like that visual of the head kick, and really the entire fight, her outclassing Ronda. It's 11 a.m. in Melbourne, 55,000 people who haven't said a word all event long, who are half asleep. The entire event was somewhat lackluster, and then they waited for this. And here we are across the world, and the great Ronda Rousey has just, come crumbling down, and we haven't seen her since, and we don't know if we're ever going to see her again. Just like that visual of the way she just slayed the dragon, and then Holly reacting the way she did, and then the aftermath at the press conference and her whole team. I mean, holy crap. I just remember thinking, like, this whole thing is going to change. Like, this sport has changed as a result. So that's a moment that will always stick out, and perhaps somewhat predictably, an event that I'll never forget is the Dublin show. Of course, I talk about it all the time. Conor doing what he did. And of course, it wasn't an event that, on paper was great going into it, but just, I'll never forget being at the open workouts and walking outside and some kids who couldn't have been older than 12 on their bikes, just kind of hanging around and asking me, is Conor McGregor in there? And then I was asking them, like, well, do you know who Conor McGregor is? And they were telling me why they like Conor McGregor. And they were saying, like, Conor McGregor is us. They literally said that. They said, Conor McGregor is us. Conor McGregor gives us hope. Conor McGregor is someone that we look up to. He came from the streets, and now look at all these people here to see him. And it was one of the first times where I recognized, like, MMA is bigger than our little bubble. This is a cultural event. This is a guy coming home promising that he'll bring the UFC back, and the entire community is here to root him on. And we don't see that often in our sport. We see that with GSP coming to Montreal, and 124 had that. That was a great crowd. It had that for 129, but we don't, Anderson had that to a degree for 134, but for the most part, it's just events in locations in Las Vegas that means something to us, but not to a community, not to a country. And that event, and it couldn't have gone better for Ireland, right? It couldn't have gone better for SBG. They swept Cathal Pendred's great comeback, Neil Seery's win, Gunnar Nelson's win, Connor's win. I mean, what a night that was. So yeah, Patty Houlihan also kicking it off. So that's my event that I don't think I'll ever forget that. What a privilege it was to cover that one. And I had to almost convince us to go because it was a Fight Pass show. You know, it didn't really mean much. So that's one that I will never forget. And we hope that there will be 100, 1,000 more that we'll be talking about. There'll probably be 1,000 more in between UFC 200 and 300, the way we're going here.
Yeah.
Seriously.
One thing is for certain, next week is going to be very memorable. We will be covering it. We will be there. He will be there. I will be there. Our crew will be there. So that's why no MMA Beat next week. But rest assured,
for the people who think, why can't you do one on Thursday there?
Yeah,
because there's no time to do it.
Rest assured, there is a lot of activity. There is a lot of coverage coming your way next week. So we are not leaving you hanging. MMA Hours on Tuesday because of July 4th on Monday. We got you covered. You will have enough. We'll be back in 2 weeks on this show to recap what is sure to be a very memorable week in the world of mixed martial arts. For now, we say goodbye. For Luke, Jeff, Danny, I am Ariel. Thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the weekend, and of course, enjoy the fights.